States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. This is the regularly scheduled BET meeting for June 2008. Second item on our agenda, consideration of applications, routine applications. Madam Clerk.
Yes, good evening. We have CD3, I move CD3, Community Development, additional appropriation of $5,000. PD3 for the Police Department, appropriation with approval to use, $8,000. PD4, Police Department, transfer, $550,000. SE28 for Selectmen, transfer 2004 grant Homeland Security, $208,185. SE29 for Selectmen, transfer 2005 grant Homeland Security, $167,090. PR3 Parks and Recreation Department, continue in force, $275,000. PR4 Parks and Recreation Department, continue in force, $200,000. PR5 Parks and Recreation Department, continue in force, $80,000. PW11 DPW, continue in force, $50,000. PW12 DPW, continue in force, $300,000. PW13 DPW, continue in force, $25,000. PW14 DPW, continue in force, $140,000. PW15 DPW, continue in force, $1,160,000. PW16 DPW, continue in force, $934,000. PW17 DPW, continue in force, $135,000. PW18 DPW, continue in force, $1,500,000. Again, I move these items.
Is there a second? Second by Mr. Mason. Mr. Mason, would you like to just describe the continuing in force of these items and why that takes place this time of year?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. The Town of Greenwich, in its charter, calls for appropriations to have a commitment within the fiscal year that they were appropriated for. And if there's not a commitment or a contractual obligation, the BET has the authority to continue the appropriation in force for one additional year. There's some exceptions on this for some of the capital projects for the schools. And what this is a series of projects that were appropriated for the fiscal year that we're in that they haven't gotten to. So what we had is the department heads come in and talk about, and most of these will all be committed. They're in contract or they're bidding or they're waiting for the cycle. So that's what this is. As a secondary note, the Budget Committee also worked on all of the prior year commitments, trying to ease those up, and we'll have that hopefully done by our July regular meeting.
Should also be noted, you should have received in your packet for the BET meeting, and that was not included in the original packet for the Budget Committee meeting, the updated information regarding SC28 and SC29. We also received an email from Mr. Geiger after making an email inquiry into the state regarding the ability for this transfer and the appropriateness of it. Any other discussions relative to the routine items? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? I think everybody's here. 12-0-0. And thank you to the Finance Department for not only these items, but cleaning up some of the older items. I know that's a lot of work, and working especially with DPW in terms of cleaning those up. And the more work that can be done to clean up that appropriation statement, the better off the town will be. And my understanding is that Anthony Giovanone, and I get his name mixed up, does a lot of work in this area.
Getting married in about 3 weeks.
Oh, congratulations.
So he's going to Bora Bora for a 3-week vacation.
Bora Bora.
Non-routine applications, ED 14.
Good evening. Let's see. ED 14, Board of Ed. This is actually it's Board of Ed Building Committee for Hamilton Avenue School. It is a subject to release that was put on an appropriation that we had, and it's $125,000 subject to release, and I so move it.
Moved by Mr. Mason,
Second.
second by Mr. Simon. Mr. Mason first, and then Mr.
Yes.
Mazza.
Real quick, obviously, I'm sure Mr. Mazza will want to speak on this. As you know, we had an additional appropriation that the RTM had just passed for $200,000. Mr. Mazza appeared before us the other night, and I think it was right after the latest building committee meeting, and they have $200,000 that is subject to our release. And quite frankly, we had a very lengthy discussion with Mr. Mazza, and he had indicated that he had a certain need for about $33,000 to my recollection on this. However, after the discussion, we chose $125,000 as a release point for this, anticipating that he would be here tonight before us to even continue the discussion a little bit more in detail. And our vote was 4-0 on that item.
Mr. Mazza? I do know that also Mr. Mazza was involved in a meeting on Friday with members of the Board of Ed, and I'm sure you've had countless meetings with Pinnacle and probably at the site, so you have that additional information for us today.
Right.
Good evening.
Yeah, I sent everybody a memo, a quick update from the one we had last week, where as of today, we have $16,500 left in our account, the balance. We have reviewed in the past several days change orders, which continue to come in. I mean, we asked the contractor 6 weeks ago get all your proposed change orders in, and they said yes, and they continue to come in. And we have been reviewing them as we go along, and last week I told you I thought we'd have around $75,000 that we'd have to do. Well, we have a number of $79,182 that we really have to approve, things that we need to have the building function. Then we have another $104,000 in change orders that we're working on and negotiating at this point. What the final number will be on that, I don't know yet, but we're in negotiations with the contractors on that. Interesting, about 3:30 this afternoon, another 3 change orders came in. They weren't large, but they essentially came in with a request. I think the 3 of them totaled $6,000 or $7,000, and whether they're valid or not, I don't know, but the change orders came in saying we want to do X, Y, and Z at the request of the building inspectors. Change a drain here, change something there. And those are the things we're going to be up against now till the end of the job. And I think the idea is we know we're going to be well over 100, probably closer to $150,000 with the change orders we have now. And the idea was we asked for all the money because of the time frame. Without getting all of the money, it sort of defeats the purpose of why we asked for it in the first place, which was to say there would be no RTM meetings in July and August. Your meeting, I believe, is July 19th or something like that. Yeah, and if we don't have the money, you release $125,000. Then if that money essentially gets spent, we can't do anything until July 19th. We started today the process of going for a partial TCO in part of the building. We're having inspections tomorrow. We're having life safety inspections. Exactly how they'll go, I don't know. The CO and TCO process is not a quick process. It takes a fairly long time, particularly in the town of Greenwich. But there's a lot of paperwork involved, and so there's a lot of things involved with it. So, if you leave us just $125,000, we're going to be in trouble. I mean, I don't know any other way to put it. We'll be hamstrung if we run up that amount of money. We haven't yet, but we've run up, we're going to run up about 80,000 of it. And we have a lot of sitting there. So if we don't get all the money, we're going to come to a point where there's things that may have to be done that we can't do.
Frank, with respect to the 125 that the Budget Committee authorized, it seems to me that the 125 certainly would take care of what you know about now and would give you some money with which to negotiate some of the additional change orders. And then if you do need us, if you do need the balance, the $75,000 balance, we can have a special meeting on a relatively short notice. That was one of the things we discussed at the Budget Committee, because we don't want to hold up this project at all. So it seems to me that we have a little bit more flexibility than putting this off till our next meeting, if indeed you need the release of the other $75,000.
Well, if you look at the numbers I gave you tonight, okay, the 79 in change orders that we really have to approve, and the 104 that are in that we're negotiating, that totals $184,000. You know, so 125.
I got lost in this, in your summary. You show 16.5 cash in the account.
We have left in the account.
Right. We're tentatively releasing 125 additional.
Right. Right. So we have 79,000 that we think that we know we have to
Okay,
approve.
so bringing that down to 60-something, which is available for change
We
orders.
have another 104,000 that we're negotiating at this point.
Okay, and being the excellent negotiator that you are,
Yeah, you know, what the number will come out at 104, I don't know.
Right.
But we're negotiating that amount of money. So essentially, you know, that's going to use up the 125. If you don't give us the money, then if we need something done, you know, like change order that came in this afternoon, I'll use an example, and I really didn't get they came in at like 4 o'clock today, really didn't get a good chance to look at them. One was a request to move a drain at the request of the building inspectors, and it was about $1,500 or $1,600. Okay, what happens if we don't have the money? Then we can't do those things. And that may be that if we don't move the drain, the building inspector won't give us a final approval, and we're stuck. I mean, I just can't emphasize that it's critical. I mean, you know, I know we're nickel and diming at this point, but after $30 million, you know, we're nickel and diming for $75,000.
Mr. Finger.
May I ask a question?
Absolutely, sure.
When a change order comes in, using the drain, for example, $1,600, contractually, how long do you have until you need to pay that change order? Obviously, you're not paying it, you know, the moment they have to do work.
It's not the question of paying it, it's the question of authorizing it. In other words, and if we don't have money, we don't authorize it. In other words, if we get one and look at that, we can just send them a letter or a note and say, proceed with that tomorrow. And each change order that we get in, we lump probably 10 or 15 change orders together that we issue as one change order to the contractor.
So are you saying that if you used up the full 125,000, knowing that, sorry, if you've used up the full 125,000, knowing that we have already approved an additional 75,000 subject to release, do you feel that you're hamstrung, that you can't authorize payments beyond that 125,000?
That's what the charter says.
well,
But you,
Mr. Kelly.
Frank, help me here. You have 16.5 in the bank, 79,182. You know you owe. The other 104,000. You did not necessarily authorize these change orders. These are change orders that they submitted to you. Is that right?
We're reviewing them.
Right. You're reviewing it. You did not authorize them, so
No.
you're not required to pay those right now.
We haven't authorized the 79 either.
But you believe you should pay the 79.
But we believe, we feel we have to do
So if we
those.
take the 79, the 16 you have in the bank, if you don't pay any of these 104 right now, and you keep your powder dry, you keep the 65, 75,000 extra that you now have, can't that take you through any contingencies you're going to have over the next 3 to 4 weeks or 6 weeks, whatever you have, when, for example, a 6,000 change order comes in, you could authorize that.
We can authorize it if we have the money in the account.
Well, you'd have $70,000 left in the account because you would not have dealt with these 104. We put those to the side.
You're absolutely right. But
Okay.
I'm also, my feeling is we're probably going to have to spend almost all of the $200,000.
But our concern is that if the money all goes out, the 200 goes out, that may, in fact, weaken your position with respect to dealing with these change orders. And what we would not want to see is somebody coming back. We want the project done. We're all agreed on that. And we want it done as efficiently and professionally as we can. But, I mean, I'm looking at this, and you're telling me that you can't authorize a change order unless you have money in the bank. You would have $75,000 in the bank if we authorize 125 tonight. To authorize any of those change orders in the next 6 weeks.
No, if we go ahead with the 79,000.
Right.
Right.
If you just pay the 79,
9,000, then we have, that's 80, that's 45, and we'd have around 50,000. But I'm also saying we have 104,000 that we're dealing with right now.
but we can deal with them later. We don't have to deal with them today, do we? Those are not change orders that you authorized.
Right.
Okay. They're just submissions by the subs.
But there are change orders that if we want to get things done, we have to tell them to go ahead. If we can't tell them to go ahead, and I have to wait until July 19th,
We're just dealing with two different issues here. The 104,000 are change orders submitted by the contractor that they've already been done.
no,
They haven't been done.
no.
Do any of them have to be done to get your COs?
I think there are probably some that have to be done.
How much?
That's what we're negotiating now, of the 104. In other words, they've come in and say, this is what we want. We think it's too much money. We think you should change it or something.
Well, that's a different story. Now you're telling us that of this 104,000 that you're negotiating, some of that has to be done to finish your job, and you want to authorize that. You don't know how much that is.
Don't know how much that
But
is.
you know that the 79 that you told us about has to be authorized to get this job done.
Right.
All right, now I
And I
understand.
know some of the 104 will have to be authorized.
All right, but we don't know how much.
I don't know how much. No, I can't tell you. I'm just telling you that's how much they've
All right,
asked.
well, that's better. Now
Yeah.
I have a better understanding.
So just so we also got a concept of the timing on this. The building committee will meet June 24th, next Tuesday, a week from tomorrow.
Right.
We'll then meet again July 8th. The BET meeting is July 21st, and then the next HAMAV building committee meeting will be July 22nd. So you're really looking at the June 24th and July 8th meetings to approve any amounts before the BET meets at its regular meeting. So that if anything occurred in terms of having amounts over the 125, it would occur within the next 3 building committee meetings.
It would occur within probably the next couple of weeks, right?
Right.
You know, some of the change orders, some of the things that have to be done, we've actually gone ahead and told them to do them before the building committee really authorizes the change order. I mean, it's the nature of the business. You know, it's hard to build a building with a committee. But it's the nature of the business that we have to move ahead with some of them. Now, you know, if we can't move ahead, we're talking July 19th. We hope to be finished by July 19th. You know.
Mr. Simon, I believe.
So I just need to clarify Mr. Kelly's questions to make sure I understand this. That of the 79, what distinguishes the 79,182 and the 104,925?
The 79,182 we've already negotiated.
And you've approved the work? Or you're going
We
to?
have not told them to go ahead yet, no.
But you've negotiated the price for the scope of work?
Negotiated the price on those, but they have not been given an order to go ahead with those.
And the
104,000 is, we're negotiating at this point with those.
And none of the work on the 104,925 has started?
That'll be, I don't know what that number would.
So
ultimately-
what I don't quite grasp, and this may be my inexperience in the construction business, you ask the contractor to submit all the change orders for work they haven't done yet, for work they think they should do.
Right. We've asked them to do that 6 weeks ago, and they continue to come in.
I mean, it's not quite, I just don't grasp the process by which the contractor says we need to do more work. You need these things done on your building? This
He
is
will
like
come
who's
in, he
driving-
will write RFI, which is a request for information. Basically, that goes to the architect. And the architect will come back and say, well, you have to do X, Y, and Z. And the contractor will then write a proposed change order that says that's something different, or that's something we didn't plan, or that's something different from the plans. And then this is what we want for it. That's the dollar amount that we want for the change order.
Mr. Mason, then Mr. Crumick.
I want to, in the Budget Committee, we had some discussion, and I want to, when I talk about change orders, it seems like you have, the example you gave us today is a $1,600 drain. You have two categories of change orders, things that you're going to do and proposed change orders you're going to negotiate. What I sense, certainly from my position, is I have no problem with change orders. I'm concerned with the other things we hear about with the project, that the change orders that we're approving are towards inspections and making sure that they need to be done for getting through, occupancy and getting the building moving forward. I don't have a list of these change orders in front of us. I'm not saying I'm speaking for the BET, but it seems that we're making a lot of these changes. This drain, did the architect call for that drain to be there? Is this something new? I don't understand these change orders. And I guess what our concern is are we doing things for cosmetic change orders, required for inspection change orders, all of the above? And I think that's what we're trying to get a grip on.
Some of these that have just come in are things that essentially might have happened 6 months ago. Okay, they're just coming in. I'll give you an example of one. Up over the art room, there's a gutter. Okay, and it's supposed to be a certain size gutter, and the contractor ordered a different size gutter. Okay, so the architect said, well, you can block it down and make it a little smaller and it'll fit. But there were also some other problems there with what the architect showed in the details and the way it had to be blocked. So they went ahead and did the work. And then they came back and said, well, we think the architect is wrong and that you owe us this money.
What category is that in?
That's when it's still in negotiation.
That's in the 104,000?
Yeah, right. So the odds are that, we probably maybe do owe them a little money there, but not the money that they're asking for. But that's what we're facing. Those are the things we have. It's not simple. It's a complicated.
Ms. Barton, and then Mr. Stone.
At the risk of being heretical in this room, I think we should approve the whole $200,000 that was originally requested. Let the building committee and Mr. Mazza do their jobs and get this building finished. With the understanding, which I don't think Mr. Mazza has missed from all this discussion, that we are quite serious about getting it done for the $200,000 and do not want to see anyone coming back here thinking there's more. But I don't think we should be hamstringing the professionals that are in charge of this process by nickel and diming them over this money.
Mr. Stone, and then Mr. Kelly.
Well, this may be an add-on to what Ms. Barton has just talked about. It seems to me that in spite of our interest, we're really not coming up with anything substantive that's going to help us determine what additions you are basically approving that would not fall under the original contract. And for that reason, if we did have a handle on it, I don't think we do, because I don't think you do. You're saying it's quite complex, and I'm sure it is. There's I guess, dozens, certainly a large number of items that may have been covered under the original agreements, and because of approvals coming in by the architect, they have triggered some change orders that you're now going through and are being faced with paying as far as part of this 104,925 and possibly additional amounts to come. Is that right? And we won't have a handle, you won't have a handle on how much of these dollars legitimately fall outside of the original scope of work that was paid for.
Oh, I think we have a handle on all of it. I mean, some of it's a question of interpretation. Our interpretation of what the plan should be, their interpretation of what the plan should be. Some of it's something that the architect comes in and says, you have to do it this way, instead of the way the plans show it, because maybe the plans were wrong. Okay, so it has to be corrected. And, all of these whole series of things that are in there.
So when do these get resolved? They certainly don't get resolved in the short term by your getting an agreement from the contractor. Apparently, they're going to get thrown into this bucket of items where we're going to be contesting.
No, they get resolved within the next probably week and a half, the ones that we're negotiating.
Okay.
If we reject it and say, no, you're not getting any money for any of that, they always have the option of filing a claim against us. And it's the same way, if it's something that has to be done, we can order them to do it by contract and file a claim against us. I mean, that's part of what the contract says.
So, hold on. Ellie.
I would just second what Ms. Barton says with respect to the 200,000. I don't know that we have any choice, since we don't know how much of this 104,000 has to be done. But I would certainly urge, if we approve the 200,000, Mr. Mazza, to your committee, that I would focus on what has to be done to get approval and not what would be nice to get done, such as a cosmetic change or something like that. And that's the only guidance that I would give you. We're not interested in micromanaging this project, and we want to see it done. So that's all I have.
Mr. Mason, before I get to you, just so I can get a count of who else would like to speak on this. Okay. So first Mr. Mason, then Mr. Finger.
I believe in the input that we've had to date, that some of the change orders, some of the things that people's eyes are seeing, would like to see several changes in the project. Not to mention any, we've heard talk of the ball fields, we've heard talk of front stairs, although they're usable, but my point being the BET as a whole recommended appropriation of $200,000. At the time we recommended that appropriation, and I believe the vote was 11-0 because one member was absent, we said, okay, we're going to give you $200,000, but we really want to put a condition on that, because we really want to see how this is going, because as Mr. Mazza said, working with a committee could be difficult. What is needed or wanted are two different categories. And the thing that I'm obviously, we all want to get the project done. But on the same token, okay, why did we put this condition to release on there? Why did we have an 11-0 vote to put that condition on there? It's because we wanted to have these discussions. And the only thing I could say to you is the prime example is at the Budget Committee, and no disrespect to the Building Committee in any way, that we're hearing that, well, we've got 79 that we think we're going to approve, and we've got 104 we want to negotiate, we've got 16 in the till, and you've given us 2. It's just not in keeping with what I think the BET should do. I think the 125 is there. I don't think any of us would be against a special meeting, but if the 200 is spent, and afterwards we decided they spent money on X and they should have put it towards Y, that second guess then won't count. And I think the Building Committee, from the perspective they stand, they need to understand, as they work through and negotiate the change orders, that we better focus on the change orders that are required to get occupancy. And that's that's where, as I see it right now, and this is a process we agreed to. We have a regular set of meetings. We're up for a special meeting if need be. if we have to, we won't have much of a choice if we get to the point where the RTM has to have a special meeting for more money. And at that point in time, then people, I think, would really be asking, where was the governance here? Where was the oversight? And that's where I think we are.
Mr. Finger?
Excuse me, but I'm confused. We keep using the phrase change orders. You've given us two examples. One was the $1,600 drain that needs to be shifted over pursuant to the building inspector. Then the other example was the gutter. It seems to have been work that has already been done, that the contractor is now asking for payment. So my question is, when a change is required, I'm assuming there's a change order request that is submitted by architect, contractor?
The contractor submits a PCO, which is a proposed change order.
Okay. And process, the architect looks at it, then the building committee looks at it, and somebody or both approve it?
Right.
And then the work is authorized to be done? Okay. I can understand that process. So you've now received, using your example, a change order for the $1,600 drain. Contractor submitted a request, change order request to do this. But in the gutter, was there a change order request submitted? Or was the work just done and now the contractor is submitting a request for payment after the fact? And if that's the case, well, that's another question.
Some of them are proposed change orders that the work was done, and because it was a question of when it was being done, to go ahead and you do it, but the question wasn't whether there was going to be extra charge for it. Some of them, they're coming back now and requesting.
So, again, using the gutter, they did the work, but that was authorized by the architect and the building committee, and there's a question of whether, so you're saying the question of whether you thought there would be a charge for that?
For it, right.
Okay, thank you.
So that's not entirely true, because the building committee didn't approve that gutter change. And some of this we rely on our Pinnacle One, who's out in the field. You wouldn't want the building committee voting on every change that has to do with construction.
But somebody on the
Somebody who
on the client
represents the
side,
town.
somebody representing the town did authorize that.
Right, okay. To weigh in as the member of the building committee, I wouldn't call this limitation of 125 micromanaging. I would call it placing fiscal discipline on a committee that, while the chairman has oversight over, still is a committee of volunteers and members of the public who might not share the same viewpoint as either the RTM or the BET relative to the 200,000. And I, for one, think that we should invoke our oversight on this process that I think this committee needs, the committee meaning the HAMAP Building Committee, and in fact, we should limit it to 125. I think while I don't necessarily want to have a special meeting, if in fact one is necessary for the July 21st meeting, before our July 21st meeting, then in fact we should entertain one. I am concerned that two proposals, or potentially three proposals, which you could argue are either cosmetic or not code issues, could in fact be approved by the building committee and then not have enough money for those subsequent PCOs that are code related and therefore not have enough money. And as Mr. Mason has pointed out, then your only alternative is to Monday morning quarterback and deal with an appropriation that requires RTM approval. And so I would rather hedge our bets that we will either not need a special meeting or have a special meeting here than have to go through the process of approving an additional appropriation and going before the RTM yet again. And so I, for one, intend on endorsing the recommendation of the Budget Committee, keeping it at 125 with the caveat, knowing full well that we may have to be back to approve the remaining 75 before our July 21st meeting.
Frank, it seems to me that with respect to the change orders for work that's already done, it would be prudent with respect to those change orders that the committee defer its decision and focus on the changes for future work that you need in order to complete the project. So that if say, the gutter, for example, I would, if I was on the committee, it's not my choice, it's the committee's choice, I would defer that, particularly if we only release $125,000. But I would point out that before we meet in our next meeting, we have the Budget Committee meeting, when most of us are also available and in Town Hall, and we can do a special meeting then quite easily. So that we're not even putting it off till the 21st. We can have it the week before that, if necessary. And normally, I would agree that nickel and diming, I don't know if you call that 75,000 nickel and diming, only in our world, perhaps. But we did say that we would give some oversight here, and that's why we we put the condition on. The 125, it seems to me, can get you through, based on your own numbers, can get you through the next 2-3 weeks, particularly if you distinguish between change orders for future work and merely change orders that could result in a claim. But that's my observation. I wonder how much of this 104 or 105,000 falls into that category. In other words, for past work rather than for future work.
Mr. Raymer, and then if we can try to wrap it up, we'll finish with Mr. Stone and then call for a question. And just so everybody's clear, right now, the motion from the budget, the recommendation from the Budget Committee, which is before us, is to approve the 125. If, in fact, we move off of that, say to release the entire 200, I would then what'll happen is we'll vote down the recommendation, and then that will be taken up subsequent. Just so talk about procedurally how we'll deal with this. Mr. Raymer.
There's another distinction that I think needs to be drawn, and that is the distinction, excuse me, that's too close, the distinction between work that needs to be done to get a certificate of occupancy as distinct from work that needs to be done simply to complete the project, which might include things that are off the face of the certificate of occupancy. Before the Budget Committee, there was a reference, I believe, from Mr. Walco, from his experience of sitting as a liaison with the Building Committee, that among the work that the Building Committee was eager to do included some fencing, I believe, around playgrounds, some changing of the rises on the front steps so that aesthetically lower steps would match the upper steps. And I think there was also the grading of some fields. I'm assuming that none of that work would be required for a CO. I don't know whether or not any of that work is included in the 104 or the 79, or if there's other work like that. But I think what would be important here would be that the focus be kept on whatever sum is approved here by the BET, that the focus be kept on what work needs to be done so that the building is proper and legal and timely for occupancy by the beginning of the school year. And if other work that isn't required for a CO can be dealt with separately by the BET, then deal with it separately, but don't be spending the allocated funds on things that are not required for occupancy. Out of curiosity, is any part of the 104 the fencing, the step facades, or the grading of the fields? Do you know?
Well, yeah, the money for the fence that is wanted around the pre-K and kindergarten classroom is in the 104. You talked about the front steps. The front steps are out. The Building Committee actually voted at their last meeting not to do that. Those are basically minor items. Everything we're doing basically is just to get the building completed and within code. There's no frills going on in the building now. We talked about the ball field, the play field. The play field is built according to the plans. So as far as the Building Committee is concerned, they're not going to do anything else with it. It's built exactly the way the drawings and plans show it. Some people are complaining because there's a little slope in the field. And there was always a slope in the field. The slope was 4 feet before we started. It's about a little over 5 feet now in the upper half of the field. But that's the way the plans were designed. So that's not going to be a change. The things that are going on are all little things in the building to get it complete. And I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, time is of the essence. If we don't get the money and we have to stop something, we stop it.
Mr. Stone.
What I believe would be helpful to the building committee and probably to any special meeting of the full board will be a listing of those items and a brief description. Right now, we've got some very fuzzy mashed potato kind of language that falls in under a number of categories, Frank. I just...
Well, if
Well,
everybody had wanted, I could give all of you a complete copy of every change order. It's probably
I think what's
200 or 300 pages of things that are out there now.
I think you know better than that. That's not what I'm looking for. I would say I'd hope that you could have what may exist already, and that is a very brief summary, particularly on the larger items that comprise this 104,925, and giving the committee and the full board that ASAP, so that we'll have something to deal with instead of just a couple of numbers that I certainly don't have any comfort in making a decision on.
Yeah, we can give you a list of the change orders that we are now negotiating and the ones we think should be done. I'd be glad to give you
It's
that.
more than a list that I'm looking for.
It's more than the list.
It's more than a list. It's a...
Well, then that's just what I said to you. I can give you the change order. These change orders come in, some of them are 12 or 15 pages long. And they go back to what the architect requested, what the plans show, et cetera, a breakdown of all the costs, so.
Is there not a very brief summary that exists or could easily exist on these particular orders?
Well, that's what I said. We have the other list, which is a breakdown and the basic one-sentence reason for it, and then what we're doing.
That's better than what we have right now.
Okay, let's move on. Mr.
Can I
Campbell.
assume, this is really a question to you, Mr. Chairman, can I assume before we vote that you're trusting that you will be kept apprised of the progress of the building committee? I know you're a representative there on the building committee. That if in fact they're running out of funds, that within really several days you could call a special meeting of this full body and we could go ahead and approve funding at that time?
Yes, we'll know a lot more after the June 24th meeting, which I suspect we're going to be approving a good chunk of this, if not the 79, if not a greater amount. And at that point in time, depending on, and I'll transmit at least the list of what we receive of the change orders. And certainly at that point, if action needs to be taken, the only time action will need to be taken is before the next July 8th meeting, because the building committee won't meet until July 8th anyway. So you would just need to have a special meeting between the June 24th meeting and the July 8th meeting.
I think that helps me know how to vote. Thank you.
Are we ready for a vote then? Mr. Mazza?
I believe the process would be for a motion to amend the pending motion to be voted upon and then the underlying motion if necessary. Am I correct?
There's only one item on
I believe I am. I move that the pending motion to approve, to release $125,000 be amended to release $200,000.
I'll accept that amendment. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion by Ms. Barnes, second by Mr. Kelly. The motion is to amend the recommendation of the Budget Committee to release the full $200,000.
Question. I just called the question.
Oh, you called the question, not question as in you have a question? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye. Oh, I'm sorry. No.
Two?
Two.
Opposed? Abstentions? 2-10-0. Correct. All those in favor to release 125,000 of the 200,000. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 12-0-0. Okay. Mr. Mazza, thank you for coming. Assessors report, number 3.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. You have my report, and just in summary, we did turn over our assessment files to the tax collector on June 11th, and they're in the process now of having the tax bills printed that will be distributed probably at the end of June. They're consolidated bills, which will have the automobiles as part of the bills. We've also completed the elderly, veterans, and firefighter credit program. If you look at item number 6, I'd like to call your attention on my numbers for the 2005 revaluation. There's some errors on that list. They're not correct. If you look at 2,000 outstanding cases, we have a value of $64 million, and the people want it raised to $1.89 million, which is billion.
You accept that?
Yes, I would. So we'll correct this for the next meeting. I'm sorry about that error.
What the correct numbers are?
I don't have them with me right now, no. Are there any questions?
Questions for the assessor? Ms. Tarkington.
Yes. Good evening, Mr. Gordon. On your point number 2, normal workload of real estate, you commented the number of building permits and how many parcels you've made the changes, and then commented about the 66 property splits and mergers since, again, both of them, I assume, since October 1st, 2007. Perhaps for the next meeting, could you, or if, because I don't expect you to know the numbers offhand, could you just provide the differential as it relates to the changes that you've made in the 939 parcels, which I assume was the increase in the improvements? And also, could you share with us the increase in the value of the land on these same 66 property splits? Because using the regression analysis, I assume that there has been a substantial increase in the land values also as a result of these splits.
Yes, we can do that for the next meeting.
Constructive.
Ms. Tarkington.
Yeah. In a meeting we had earlier today, Mr. Simon and I, you did talk about there being some sales that you don't necessarily get full knowledge of because of the manner in which they're transferred, because the sales are in entities of some type, corporate vehicles or some other vehicles where there's a transfer. Perhaps at some, in the next report, you could share with us a little bit more information to help the board understand this issue, and then perhaps as a result of that, we can get some, better guidance to our legislators to perhaps help us on this area.
I'll do that for the next meeting. What you're talking about is where stock assets that own a real estate parcel are bought out. Another person assumes these assets, and under our current laws, they do not have to record this as a sale. And we know of a number of large commercial properties, and I understand that there's also some residential, and we'll try to do some work on that for you.
Thank you.
Mr. Gordon, I have a question for you. The updating of public information, is that the new online information that is going to be accessed? When do you expect to get that agreement executed?
Right now, we're waiting for some review by the law department. It was recommended by our purchasing department that the law department go over the contract before we sign it, because there is some specific language in there that the town should be aware of before we sign it.
And did you ask the law department for a return of that contract in some period of time?
We did not specify a time. However, today we did remind the law department of the fact that we're waiting for it.
Is the expectation to be online, have that contract executed by our next meeting?
I doubt that it will happen that fast. Perhaps at the next meeting we can talk about such things as the type of data that we might want to release. But I doubt if the contract will be ready at that point.
Okay. Ms. Tarkington, we'll move on.
Yes, I wanted to ask one more question. The volunteer firefighter tax credits, you say are complete. Do you know how many volunteer firefighters requested these tax credits, or how many you approved?
There's about 75.
75.
Some of them own real estate, but most of them have automobiles, and they can take the credit either on real estate or automobiles.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Is there a motion to approve the assessor's report?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mason, second by Ms. Tarkington. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? 12-0-0. BET Committee and Liaison Reports and Special Project Team Reports. You should have received a series of these in your packet. My understanding is that there were also some that we received tonight as a result of it. I guess it went to Elaine, but Elaine was out. There was a mix-up. I guess some weren't included, but are here tonight, correct?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Norton.
the audit committee report was handed out tonight because we met on Thursday morning. Actually, we had two meetings, as it indicates, on Thursday morning, and they were not completed in time for the package to go out Thursday afternoon. So they're on the table tonight.
These, first let me ask, are there any questions with the reports that were received from the various committees and special project teams? I've received, I'll just say here and not include it in my officer's report, that I have received several updates relative to various special project teams about the ongoing nature of the discussions that are being had. I applaud those teams for doing the work. My expectation, however, is for next month to please file a written report. Part of it is to start to build our portfolio of accomplishments and work that we have done over the past several months that is outside of the budget process, so that we can look at the work that's being done. And also, as I indicated at the organizational meeting, some of the goals and objectives of the town assessor and the comptroller are relative to how well these special project teams are moving along, and the communications as between the finance department and the assessor's department. So I would ask that those be generated, produced, and there's follow through on that. If you have any questions, once again, those assignments were divvied up equally between Bob Stone and myself relative to if you have questions. So please go ahead and do that. Based on those comments, any other questions for any of the committees, reports? Comptroller's report.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, BET members. You all have a copy of this month's Comptroller's report. I'll answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Simon.
Yes, a question on page 3, the next to the last paragraph. On the school reimbursements, could you comment on this briefly?
On the school reimbursements is still in the internal audit stage. I can't comment because it's the internal auditor hasn't made a report as of yet.
Well, this uses the past tense, does it not? This says we were able to recoup. That implies that we.
That was LoSIP.
That's LoSIP.
LoSIP, all right.
That was the local capital improvement. I can comment on that. You want me to, Mr. Simon?
That's not the same as school construction.
No.
No. He's currently working in a couple areas. He's working in a recoupment of LoSIP, local capital improvement funds from the state. He's doing working in the area of school construction reimbursements, and he's also looking at the COSCA.
Bridge.
There's a fourth one. The bridge reimbursements, and subsequent to M3, he's going to follow up with the COSCA remediation filing.
So what would be an example of LoSIP?
Paving. We get approximately $325,000 to $330,000 a year in reimbursements from the state for a variety of eligible local capital improvements. They could be anything from paving to purchase of equipment or anything related to improvements to the ground, the roads and streets and bridges. And to simplify it, because the paving, for example, is in the millions of dollars each year, and you've got additional expenditures in different areas, the simplest way to apply for the LoCIP reimbursement is to go for the paving, because the work is done at the beginning of the year and it's completed first. So we simply apply the whole $325,000 against paving reimbursements. And what this represents is 5 years of reimbursements. We were 4 years behind.
The state is, or we were?
We were.
4 years behind?
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Tarkington.
Yes, Mr. Minarski, as to the elderly tax credit and deferral program, as a committee member, along with Mr. Krummick, we certainly appreciate the assistance that you've provided in terms of the financial scenarios and so forth of the program. But to the best of my knowledge, the committee has not submitted a report to the first selectman containing their recommendations and amendments, or if it did, I did not receive a copy of it. So I just wanted to make that one comment about that particular sentence. I mean, obviously we've made progress, but I'm not aware of a report to the, did you receive it?
To you that I do not have a formal report. The town administrator has been working with the chair of that committee, Kate Brennan, who, for family medical reasons, has been distracted, and she is, I think it's going to be reconvening, but there are issues that relate to the different proposals that need to be fleshed out. I would expect the committee to do that, not to, I mean, I want a complete product that the committee has vetted, as has in the past, that stands a good chance of also getting approval too.
Well, I think that there is group that has been working with the controller and the assessor to assist that, but again, I'm not aware of an actual report being submitted yet.
Mr. Norton.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to applaud the efforts of both the controller and the internal auditor in the recovery for the LoCIP money, as was reported in our committee meeting on Thursday. Actually, the total amount received, including the cash that we have received in a letter from the state of Connecticut, it's almost $1.6 million of LoCIP money that we will be receiving. I've either received or will receive by the end of the fiscal year.
Mr. Krummick.
Just on the elderly tax credits, to follow up on the previous statements, we had a meeting that we thought was going to be our final meeting, and we voted on certain things to include in the report. We weren't unanimous in that, some of the things. But my understanding is it's been bounced back to the committee, perhaps by the first selectman, to have us take a look at things again and try to finalize a report. That's my understanding. I don't think it's been scheduled yet, but I think that's where things stand now. And we have greatly benefited from Mr. Benarski's efforts and Mr. Gortney's efforts on that task force. And hopefully we will be in a generous mood when we do convene again.
Is there a motion to accept the comptroller's report? Moved by Mr. Norton, second by Mr. Simon. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions, 12-0-0. Treasurer's report? Any questions? Do I have a motion to accept the treasurer's report?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Norton, second by Mr. Mason. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions. Approval of the BET meeting minutes for May 19th, 2008. Do I have a motion? Moved by Mr. Finger.
Second.
Second by Mr. Mason. Questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions. 12-0-0. Abstention. 11-0-1. Mr. Kelly. Officers report, Mr. Stone? Ms. Tarkington?
No, have no.
I would just note that tonight we do have in attendance Alma Rutgers, our former clerk. Welcome.
You see she was taking notes?
We'll ask you to look at our minutes later.
She's already provided substantial help since she's departed.
We also have in attendance the BOC chairman and secretary, I believe. Thank you for coming. I know that you're looking into working with the BET over the summer in terms of trying to get greater input up front as opposed to after the guidelines are in February to affect the 2010 budget. And so thank you for coming, and we hope to be able to do that with you over the summer. And also Leslie Moriarty, Vice Chair of the Board of Education, and Al Cava and our Town Administrator. Thank you. Most of this month, from the chairman's point of view, was spent really with Hamilton Avenue and closing out of accounts, meeting with finance. We will discuss in just a few minutes Nathaniel Witherell business plan, which took up a great deal of my monthly meeting, along with Mr. Finger, meeting with the finance department. And so I won't spend any of your time now talking about that. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. I would also ask the finance department formally to, again, look at what's coming down for our July meeting and then anticipating what could be there for what would be our August meeting, so that we can make a decision in July whether or not we will hold that August meeting. Historically, or at least for the past few years, under my predecessor, we did not have an August meeting. So hopefully I'll live up to that. Under new business, approval of annual GWI general wage increase. Ms. Tarkington, Chairman of our HR Committee.
Yes, the HR Committee met, discussed this. Ms. Cass has handed out a variety of schedules and documents regarding consumer price index trends. Obviously, Mr. Geiger also worked on the preparation of some of the schedules, and she proposed incremental raises for, and other information included the proposed incremental raises for the management confidential personnel for the period covering July 1st, 2008 through June 30th, 2009. And the committee really had lengthy and extensive discussions, both at its regular meeting last week as well as a special meeting today, and covering areas of concern such as adequate budget funding if the committee chose to go beyond the rate which was in the budget, which is an increase of 3.25%, and wanted to make sure that there were no issues covering the potential and approximate almost $13,000 increase, discuss compression issues between the MC employees and the union groups, and again, the size of individual increases if this should be increased. Again, the increase from 3.25% to the 3.5%, which was proposed by the head of Human Resources Director, Ms. Cast. The committee debated the merits of granting, the 3.5% increase, and the committee recommends and supports unanimously that a 3.5% general wage increase covering the fiscal year July 1st, 2008 to June 30th, 2009 be approved by this board.
So just so I'm clear, the HR Committee adopted the resolution that was provided with one amendment and changing the 3.25 to the 3.50%?
Yes, there were a couple other minor word changes, Mr. Chairman, that were made to
So
that.
why don't we use that document so that we understand what we're voting on?
Okay, well, I think you could share that document, perhaps. Just share it.
Sure.
So I think it's
How will the resolution read now?
resolved that A, dropping the word "the" thereafter, that a MC pay plan, adding the words pay plan, general wage increase for the fiscal year July 1st, 2008 to June 30th, 2009, dropping the word "be," of 3.5% be approved. And that's the extent.
And delete the remaining last
And
sentence.
delete the remaining last sentence.
Did everyone get that? Let me just read it again. Resolve that a MC pay plan general wage increase for the fiscal year July 1st, 2008 to June 30th, 2009 of 3.5% be approved. Discussion? Mr. Simon.
I have two questions. What is the role of the first selectman in this process, if any?
An opportunity to accept
Thanks. I meet periodically with the Director of Human Resources as well as the Director of Labor to discuss a myriad of personnel issues. Certainly, we look at individual performance-related matters, we look at grievances, and we look at compensation. In terms of looking at the wage increases, we take into consideration what the market is. Looking at CPI, we look at what prospective increases may be for our unions through collective bargaining. A very broad picture is painted, and they make a recommendation to me and ask for my concurrence.
I would assume they have.
Yes.
The second question is, now, throughout the year, there have been other discussions about the MC package changing. And how do those changes ever get consolidated, and how do they get voted on? An example being, there's changes to the vesting schedule, there are changes to the years in which you vest. When does all that get, who votes on that, and what's the approval process? This may be slightly off the question, but I'd like to
my
at least have a
knowledge,
sense of the whole
to my knowledge,
process.
vesting in terms of for pension,
Mhm.
the defined.
Or how long you have to be here to vest and so forth. There are different changes that are proposed.
Those have not come up. Those have not come up in my tenure as of yet. But my recollection, you're saying the Board of Selectmen, and ultimately the Retirement Board.
And we don't vote on those. We don't vote on the entire, I guess I'll ask the question slightly different. So if there's changes to the whole MC package, such as you get 8 weeks of vacation, I make this up, who votes on that? What is the process by which all of the MC total compensation gets paid?
I believe it should come back to this board because that would have financial implication to the degree, to a significant degree, in putting in place a major departure from current practice. That's my feeling, based upon my experience here, that was the expectation.
Well, also, any change to the MC any change to the pay plan requires, at least based on prior town attorney opinion, that all appointing authorities approve those changes. So not so much as a BET or as a finance board, but simply as an appointing authority, would we have to vote on changes to that pay plan? Ms. Cast seems to be nodding.
So
her
if,
head.
Certainly, any change to the pay plan that requires financial change would have to come back to the BET and be approved by the appointed bodies that govern the individual MC. More minor changes that we have made, such as unclassifying an MC position, a minor change to benefits that doesn't have any kind of significant financial impact, maybe giving them a personal day that currently their union counterparts have, but none of the MSC have. That has typically been brought to the Board of Selectmen.
and they vote on it.
Yes, but anything with a significant financial impact would come back to the appointing authorities and of course the
Guys, one more quick question. So an example being, if we say to MC employees, you're no longer eligible to be in the defined benefit plan and you have to go into the defined contribution plan, does that get approved by the appointing authorities or just by the Board of Selectmen or by?
that would be first to the Board of Selectmen, because it's a benefit that really doesn't have a significant impact on the financial outlay of this year's budget. You're changing a benefit from a DB plan to a DC plan, which we did.
I know
Then we
that.
brought it to the Board of Selectmen.
Right, and the only point I'm trying to make is that I keep worrying about the process of making sure that changes to the plan are made in a comprehensive way. So you can see over time that changes are occurring and where a general wage increase fits in. When we review a labor settlement, you get to see all the changes at once. And I think that's part of what we look at as a town, what people contribute to their health care, what people get in terms of retirement benefit, what people get in terms of a wage package. And if we're only being asked to approve a small part, I'd like to see the context of everything.
I would say I think you're speaking of total compensation, which has been a area of interest, I think, of the HR committee of the BET for some time, and I think the HR committee of the BET has made great strides over the last several years to focus in on that rather than specific little increases where we were, when I first came on the board, making adjustments, $800, $700 the steps, which no longer are part of that.
Ms. Tarkington.
I'll just add to this that while the part of the Hayes study that's being shared this evening relates to, call it the compensation, there was a benefit review aspect to it also. So it was not as extensive, but we wanted to get an overview and narrow down the scope of that just because of the cost and to focus on it and complete one project. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Kelly?
I just wanted to respond to Mr. Simon that we did get the cost of the step in addition to the 3.25 and the 3.5. And with a 3.25 increase, the total cost with step is 4.55, and with a 3.5, the total cost is 4.78.
Other questions? Another question, Mr. Cava, I know the director of HR has agreed with this from a labor contract standpoint. You also approve the 3.5 or recommend the 3.5?
Yeah, we've had discussions on it.
Other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 12-0-0. Just as a matter of process for the meeting, the remainder of the meeting, we'll finish our discussion with the financial review of Nathaniel Witherell business plan. That'll be presented by the comptroller. It's anticipated then we will go into executive session, which my understanding has for the purpose of discussing the draft MC study. And at that point, because that's the last item on the agenda, then we will conclude the meeting from all intents and purposes except for the executive session and then reconvene just to adjourn, but we will take up no other business after that executive session. Nor do we anticipate a vote as a result of this study, correct? Okay. So with that, Mr. Mynarski, our comptroller, let me give a little bit of a background on this item. Going back to this year's budget process, when Nathaniel Witherell came before us, or was anticipated that the Project Renew would be part of this year's budget cycle, that they then withdrew that as a result of delays in the process in terms of Project Renew. It was contemplated then, and money was put into the Finance Department's budget for an independent review to look at, and this is important, to look at the business plan that was laid out, I believe it's in 2006, to look at how we have done relative to that, how Nathaniel Witherell has done relative to that business plan, and then to ensure that whatever's being built is consistent with that business plan. And then if you back into that, if it's anticipated that at the earliest they would be part of the 2010 budget cycle and potentially thereafter, we would want to get a jump on the review of those three items. And with that, Mr. Finger and I had a conversation with Mr. Mynarski and Mr. Geiger, and I asked Mr. Mynarski to just give us an update as to where we are since our meeting last week, and then sort of the process, and if people have comments, that one, they can talk about them today, and if not, certainly through email after there's been an opportunity to think about this, to then get it to finance so that we can keep the ball moving and so that we're in a position at the latest of February of '09 to have an independent review of these items.
Okay, you took away a lot of the remarks, the opening remarks I was going to make. So anyway, just to repeat some of it, Mr. Finger, Mr. Walko met with Roland and myself last Monday, and we were going to try to expedite the process. As far as to continue on what Steve said, we wanted to have everything documented and done so that this board has the information well in advance of the budget cycle next year. And just real quickly, there was an RFP done in September of '03, which resulted in a report. And subsequent to that, there was a business plan. And this was prepared in on November 30th, or by November 30th, 2005, and issued in 2006. And I know there's newer members here, and please contact me if you need a copy so that you can see this document.
Need a copy?
I know there's 3 or 4 of you. Oh, you do have it or don't have it?
I do not have it.
Okay. We'll get some extra copies. And then Mr. Ormsby, I believe, came and gave a presentation in January of '07, and he gave the PowerPoint presentation on the back presenting project renewal. We were going to try, finance was going to try to approach Bloom and Shapiro. And I know the audit committee, if they recall, during the process of hiring them, they did brag about the fact that they had a consulting arm that specialized in nursing homes. I remembered it, and I called them, and they did, in fact, say that they did have an arm that did specialize in auditing of nursing homes. Unfortunately, subsequent to that meeting, they backed off and didn't want to proceed and participate for a variety of reasons. Number one is they felt they would lose their independence and their objectivity in that they would be auditing this firm, the nursing home, and didn't have total confidence in their work if in the future they issued a report and the numbers were wrong. And also they said that it was more of an auditing in so far as numbers, consulting firm, as far as allocations for fringe benefits, et cetera. And they did lack the expertise to do audits in the area of architectural engineering and construction studies. So they backed out. So what we need to do is we need to expedite the process and issue an RFP as quick as possible. One piece was, Mr. Walker, you were going to meet with Mr. Ormsby and add a little bit to this as far as additional information. We didn't get that feedback, so we need that piece. But I did look at this, and this was fast-tracked, and this was due, this RFP, back in 2003, with a deadline to come back by September 30th, and with the plan to come before the BET in either, for this document, October, November, and December. So we do have time to get an RFP out there and have the work done so that they can meet with this board in October, November, December. And the quicker, the better it is, because the first selectman also needs the information as part of the budgetary process. So that's where we stand right now, as far as the getting the RFP out. In the RFP, the scope, some of the scope no longer applies. There's a review of the certificate of need that was in here, which won't be needed, but I'll answer any other questions now.
Okay, let's entertain a few questions then. Mr. Simon?
I was at the Budget Committee meeting when we appropriated this money. I thought the purpose of the money was to review Nathaniel Witherall's financial plan that they were going to submit with their financial offering, to make sure that we agreed with the assumptions that were in that financial plan, and that we were going down a path of sound fiscal responsibility, that this plan does in fact make sense, and that we agreed with it and independently verified those assumptions. That's what I thought we had set aside the money for.
Also, that this plan is in sync with the plans of the architect and the building committee is doing now, so that they don't.
But we were going to wait, I thought, until someone developed a financial plan from Nathaniel Witherall and validated that that plan was correct. That's what I thought we were going to do. I may be wrong, but...
Ms. Tarkington?
Yes, I guess this is a little I think the town perhaps has moved beyond some of this. While this is a good study for everyone to look at, I think that this board should remember that after that study was completed, Nathaniel Witherall hired the Robert A.M. Stern Architecture Group to do a study of its building to determine if it could be renewed or renovated or whatever. And they brought in Entech Engineering, a globally renowned engineering firm, as well as Robert Silman's engineering firm, which again are equally renowned in terms of structural issues. They then also brought in a programming firm to take the business plan that Witherall had prepared and to sit and meet with Witherall's executive director, all of its staff, its board members, BET members, and many other people were involved. I was sitting on the BET at that point in time. And that was the programming done for basically the staffing of the various units, the layout of the nursing units, and so forth. That was then basically, and from that work was produced, I think it was 15, 16, 17 pages of what then would be the outline for the specifications for the new building. Those specifications, together with the updated business plan, the financial aspects of this, were updated in early 2007. And I believe there were several other documents, too. I'd have to go back, but I believe I had forwarded those to Mr. Geiger and yourself recently. And those documents basically became the documents that were sent, along with all the rest of this, for approval to the BET last year of the $7.3 million and to the RTM. What's happened since is that the board took those 17 pages of specifications and wrote their own more detailed specifications that were delivered to the town building committee. And they were approved by the board only this past December at their board meeting, whatever that was, the 15th or 20th of December. So, a lot of that type of work has been done. I'm very concerned, and my understanding of the study was perhaps a little bit different. I was more optimistic that this study would help move Witherall ahead, help Witherall basically implement its MDI technical software so that they could report better. So they could help a firm such as Blum & Shapiro, which is the town's auditors at this point in time, work with them, with the financial staff and Witherall to really collapse, if we want to call it, the business plan together with the annual budget, such that it becomes one structure versus going back to step one. I think there's a great danger of going back to step one. The building committee has been going through a multi-step process with the architect based on all this previous programming to produce the plans for the new building. But again, I don't think that the financials are quite as old as you're talking about. I think they really were completed in the first quarter of last year. So I do want to make these, I'm afraid if a report comes out that that's going to, really slow down the project. I think it's imperative to move ahead the Witherall project. And I think it's imperative to move it ahead as it was approved by the BET and the RTM only 1 year ago. And I think it's, anything that helps to confirm that at this point in time, particularly before an architect is selected, which could be as early as sometime in July, or maybe that will slip into the Labor Day period, that kind of thing would be most constructive. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're jumping the gun with this. And just to kind of echo what Mr. Simon said, Obviously, I was in the Budget Committee when we decided to appropriate these funds. I'm also, with Ms. Tarkington, a liaison to the Nathaniel Witherell. We, in fact, met with Mr. Ormsby and the Nathaniel Witherell folks today to discuss, among other things, their business plan. And I think that the misconception that you're working under is that the Project Renew would come to us as part of next year's budget. My understanding from what you said, Peter, is that that's what's driving the urgency of this, so we can get out ahead of the curve. But I think what's actually going to happen is this. The Budget Committee mentioned to the Nathaniel Witherell people that because it's a fully bonded project, we took it out of the CIP, and we said, when you guys are ready to come to us, even, as not as part of the budget process, we will entertain it then. We'll entertain the application. We knew and we know that they are, in fact, going to revise their business plan to update it, not only to update it with better construction numbers, because they are going to go out and retain the building committee is going to go out and retain an architect and get more up-to-date projections of costs, and also they'll be further along in their process of negotiating once they have some more hard costs to negotiate with the state of Connecticut in terms of the reimbursements, but also because since this business plan was put together, their operating plan, I think, has changed somewhat, particularly with respect to the rehabilitation, the short-term rehabilitation. So I think they are planning to revisit their business plan, and then when they've done that, at that point, I think we have ample opportunity to use the consulting money we have in order to evaluate the up-to-date plan. And again, I don't believe that they're planning to submit the Project Renew as part of our budget process. So I think we have more time than you thought when you were meeting last week.
Okay. Any other initial comments from other members of the BET? My suggestion is, though, to try to stay ahead of the curve, is to, and tell me if you think this is a worthwhile venture, is to have a discussion with Nathaniel Witherell at the July Budget Committee meeting, which should be light, as far as we know right now.
I think so, yes.
And to make sure that we are on the same page relative to timing, relative to what the expectation is, and to where the business plans would come out, what information will be provided, knowing that we at some point would have to do our independent review prior to our approval of Project Renew. Mr. Mason.
I would think that would be a good suggestion. Our concern is, in echoing what Mr. Simon and Mr. Krummick said, I think the intent is it's a huge project, and the BET put that money in the finance budget for an overall look at the end. What I think I'm hearing with Ms. Tarkington is that was all the RTM, the BET, everybody approved that project on its original scope and its original business plan. And if they're drifting from that significantly, I think that would be the opportunity we'd want to bring the Nathaniel Witherell Building Committee in. I would think we'd want to bring in, rather than Nathaniel Witherell.
We'd have to work through the chair.
Yeah, we'd have to work through the chair.
And if they want them there.
And make sure that they are, that they fully understand that we're going to want this timing, or we're going to want this time segment for the review. And I think that would be a good way to do it.
Mr. Krummick and then Ms.
Yeah, I think, Mike, that it's the building committee that's going to be responsible with the architect for generating the construction numbers, but it's the board that's responsible for generating the business plan and the operating assumptions. So I think we really do want to speak to the board. I think that the building committee gives the information about projected construction costs that is plugged into the business plan. But I don't believe that our July meeting, although that's we may be light, gives them enough time. By September, the building committee will have gone ahead, selected the architect. They will have started, presumably, their preliminary numbers. So we'll at least have a better idea of when the Nathaniel Witherell Board anticipates receiving the construction projections from the building committee in September. I'm not sure they'll know anything more than we heard today for our July meeting.
Ms. Tarkin.
First, by the July meeting, we won't even have had the interviews with the architects. So I think that the, Mr. Crummack's comments there are even then perhaps a bit premature. More importantly, I think it's critical that Mr. Ormsby be involved with any meeting with the Budget Committee or the BET. And it's my understanding that depending on flexibility of the meeting, that's Budget Committee, he's not apt to be in town. And I do think his leadership would be very constructive to be there. But I think there's another misconception here. Nursing homes like mini warehouses or whatever are basically real estate business, but they're operating businesses. And you have to totally link how they're managed and staffed with the business plan, if you want to call it, which is the terms that the town uses, with the actual construction plans. So it's critically important if you're designing a nursing home to know, and you want to have, say, 5 units, which is what Nathaniel Witherell currently has. There's an optimum size of those units, there's an optimum staffing, so you can't delink what's already a business plan with a staffing model from the actual architectural plans. And so any changes there begin to make changes that begin to get tough to manage. But anyway, thank you.
So, Ms. Barton, next. My recommendation would be simply to refer this item so that it stays with us to the Budget Committee. Let them have a conversation with the Nathaniel Witherell, either Building Committee or Nathaniel Witherell Board. Let them come up with whether or not it's July or September or October, depending on how it goes, to schedule a meeting to talk about the timing of this so we do not lose, I won't say momentum, but so we don't lose focus on this, so that we are in a position when Project Renew does come forward that we have the necessary information and the necessary independent review. And simply to leave it broad for the Budget Committee to take this up. Ms. Barton.
If the purpose of the review is to have a review of what sounds like, in effect, a new strategic or operating plan for Nathaniel Witherell, that sounds like more of a presentation to this board. It sounds to me, from everything I've heard and from what I've read in the papers, that there is some degree of rethinking of the business plan of the Nathaniel Witherell. To what extent is unclear, and it depends on who you talk to. And perhaps the representatives of the board could come and have a discussion with us about that in either, if July is too soon, then September.
I do not disagree with you. My only thought process was that initial meeting was going to be more about timing and about process. But if, in fact, it evolved into a much larger discussion, I would agree with you that it would be better served to just make the presentation to this body. And I think that's one of the things we'll try to work collectively. We'll try to work on to see where they are and where we should be. Mr. Simon.
So just to reiterate, we said we wanted to review the business plan and all the assumptions associated with the bond offering. It all revolved around the bond offering and nothing else. You need to know from them when they might want to issue the bonds. You have a timetable. You need to get the name of firms that could do the work. You have to go out on an RFP. You need to go through a whole process. But you can't go out on a process to hire somebody until you have some sense of when they're going to be ready to present their financing plan. And that's the timetable we need to develop. And they may not be ready to go out for financing till a year from now. I don't have a clue. In which case, we don't have to do anything, in my mind, until next March, in terms of going out to find a contractor to do the review of the financing plan.
And that could very well may be, but I think it's important that we stay ahead of this so that we're not in a position where we're making decisions without the right information.
Concerning the financing.
That's right.
We could be up which is like being updated by the board, as opposed to doing our own independent analysis of their financing. I'm not quite sure which one. I'm getting slightly confused then.
My understanding was money was set aside to review the assumptions that they made relative to Project Renew, and to see that whatever money, that there was confidence that in fact, at least at this point, based on their prior business plan, that in fact they were going to be budget neutral going forward. And so if there is a change in that plan vis-a-vis either what they're constructing or simply a change in the plan and what they're constructing is exactly what they had first envisioned, then we should know that before that bond offering goes out and before we approve Project Renew.
Well, in theory, they're going to present, not in theory, but in fact, they're going to present a new business plan that goes with the bond offering. And that's the one, and that's the business plan we wanted to have independently validated.
That's right.
Not right, and it was designed to be budget neutral.
I think these issues can all be further discussed and with the Nathaniel Witherell board, and once again, whether that's July or September or later, and whether that's before the budget committee or if it's a much broader discussion before the full BET in the coming months. If you have other questions or concerns about this, I suggest that you email Peter Mynarski, and we'll begin to start having discussions with the chairman of the Nathaniel Witherell board to set this in motion. All right. Ms. Tarkington?
Yeah, I'd just like to make another comment here, though.
Brief, please.
It's critical that if there are going to be changes or change to a business plan that begins to change the mix of rooms, say from 160 beds of long-term care and 40 beds of rehab, that really that business plan be adapted or changed prior to any architectural drawings or anything being done here. So there is a reason, if there are going to be changes, that we all understand what's going to happen sooner rather than later, because otherwise an architectural contract may be signed to design something that was not what was previously approved by this board and the RTM board.
Mr. Krummick, briefly, and then we'll move on.
Okay, briefly, I don't agree with that last statement. The reason is I believe that part of the development of the business plan will be for them to design a facility that suits what their plans actually are. My understanding of this whole process is that we wanted to be ready when they came to us for the bond resolutions and for the funding of Project Renew, that we would be in a position to evaluate what they came to us with. And apparently that's evolving. It's not going to evolve in this board. It's going to evolve with the building committee, but I think primarily the Nathaniel Witherell board. And that is what we're going to be asked to evaluate further on. And I don't see how they could possibly do that without going forward with the using the money that's already been appropriated in order to develop and refine their plans. And that requires the architect. It requires reasonable cost projections based on how they're actually planning to design the facility. And we won't know that until further down the process.
Thank you for all your comments. I think the one thing that this conversation has confirmed for me is that we should definitely have communications with Nathaniel Witherell, that can only help the situation, and that we will have a discussion with them publicly, whether it's at the BET Budget Committee level or at the full BET level between now and the end of the year. And I think that can only lead to a greater public input and can benefit Nathaniel Witherell and the town as a whole. So thank you, and we'll keep the process going, and as this process moves along, input will be helpful from all BET members. With that,
just one final comment.
Yes, Mr. Mynarski.
You asked me if I thought the agenda would be light in July. As you were speaking, I started thinking, These people are going to speak to you tonight. I'm going to assume that that's going to be on the agenda of the Hay study for July. Frank Mazza will be back for the $75,000. I had scheduled the Board of Education transfer between MOCs as a policy review, which can easily be put off to September, and then there's this topic. So you've got potentially 3 lengthy discussion items.
Okay.
Otherwise, you only usually get grant approvals in the month of July.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Meinhardt.
I move we release the $75,000. I withdraw that.
Thank you. Okay, so is there now a motion to go into executive session for the discussion of the MC compensation study?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Tarkington. Second by Mr. Norton. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions. 12:00 at 8:13.